Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing Charlie here. We ask for your presence tonight. We ask that you bless us with the Holy Spirit. Just guide us this evening. Bless Charlie. And we entrust this evening to our Blessed Mother of the Immaculate Heart, praying Hail Mary, full of grace.
The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mary, Queen of Peace,
pray for us.
Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
My name is Josh, and I help run an Ignatian prayer group here in Las Vegas, and we have a number of our members here. I was introduced to Charlie about 2 months ago by a random woman on Facebook who called the Movement of the Spirit to send me one of his videos, and I proceeded to watch a number of his videos, and I found them quite fruitful. Last Wednesday, in the Gospel reading, the day after I found out that this talk was going to take place, I was excited about it. And I was reading Matthew chapter 7, and it talks about prophets. It talks about knowing them by their fruits. And I couldn't help reflecting upon some of the fruits in my own life when hearing Charlie's message. And in particular, a greater desire to persevere in prayer, and in particular to pray for Christians throughout the world that are being persecuted. So hopefully tonight there'll be many more fruits that are grace to us. One way to describe Charlie is a mystic with a unique message of hope in a time where there's less and less reason for hope. At least that's the way it looks. But I think of Charlie first and foremost as a man of really devout prayer. Someone who listens intently to God, tries to discern the will that God has for him, and then takes action. And that's why I'm here. And having said that, now I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Thank you, Josh. How many of you here read the website? Okay, so most of you. So I won't be completely to everybody here. First of all, I got to tell you, I had, for those of you who don't know, I had significant neurological damage 13 years ago. A weird confluence of events. My spinal cord was deprived of spinal fluid. So I always have pain in my right leg. The funny thing about it is I can walk or I can sit, and I'm fine, for the most part. Standing still, if I do it for more than 5 minutes, it triggers a whole lot of pain. In these things, I end up standing a lot, nonetheless. The adrenaline gets going and all that sort of stuff. All it means is tonight I'll be wiped out. And by the way, Margie, I'll probably sleep late tomorrow. So, bear with me on that. There's a couple of things I want to talk about, and I want to talk a little bit differently about a few things because our world is so visibly collapsing right now. And I want to reassure you about some things. In fact, I'm doing a little. In my columns, I wrote something yesterday about Brexit and all that, and what it portends. But in my columns, we've had that ridiculous Supreme Court decision. Just absolutely untethered to anything resembling law. I got to tell you, when the guardians of the law substitute their preferences for law, the rule of law is dead and justice is dying. What you're going to have from there is either you have a society that degenerates into complete chaos with rival bands of roving warlords always fighting each other for supremacy, or you decide that you're going to be a regent of democracy. You're going to be God's regent of democracy. The reason I didn't write for almost a week last week was that we have gotten into the most dangerous territory. And people, they know that something terrible is afoot, but don't know how to deal with it. I was worried that, okay, the only people, I've been writing for my priest for 21 years. Bob Stone, in fact, I saw my first spiritual director last year. He had been he was a very prominent canon lawyer, and he had been a cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School before he became a priest. He was not, this was not the sort of thing that he was into and all that, which is actually why I chose him, his integrity to be the first person I told. I knew that he didn't like that sort of thing, but I also knew he had such integrity that if there was something real there, he would tell me that, you know, okay, we better, and we did. He did say, okay, you better keep me informed after all, Charlie. But when I saw him last year, when I came in, he looked at me, he says, oh, Charlie, he said, every time I read the news, I think of you. I heard it 20 years ago, how it would be and when it would come and all of that sort of stuff. I want to reiterate. I want to reiterate from the start, from the early 60s, told that this terrible storm was going to come upon the world. It's always been coupled with that it is not what it seems. We are in deep trouble because we have thought we are sufficient to ourselves. We think we are the masters of the universe. But what it portends, God is renewing his people. He's calling us back. There will be a rescue on that. Now it's very important to get that across. I know as things get uglier, as you see, to see jihad constantly murdering people is one thing. To see our own societies, Western societies, not doing anything about it. In fact, blaming atrocities on Christians, the Amish extremists. It's just amazing and disheartening things. You know what happened in Turkey today? No one. We have to rise. But you see these things and you can wonder, who speaks for me? Who's going to step up for me? Well, you step up for you. But you do it by doing the little things. I'm going to have to reverse course for just a minute. I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, I see that about half of you haven't heard of me. People call me a mystic or a prophet or all that sort of thing, and I wrote a week ago, said I'm uncomfortable with that. There's truth, there's mysticism involved there. I've had an angel that's been instructing me since I was a kid, visiting me and all that. I don't like to think of that. I like to think that I'm just a guy with the strangest job in the history of the world. Trying to muddle through as best I can. And let me tell you, I've been examined. I've been under spiritual direction by 3 priests of Opus Dei who don't suffer fools gladly for 21 years now. On things. I mean, you know, the Archdiocese. My Archdiocese did an investigation into me back late last year, finished it up right at the beginning of March of this year, and they put no restrictions whatsoever on my content. I can write what I want to, I can give the presentations I want to. You may have seen different in a few places. One place that should have known better said I was banned in Denver, and they changed their headline, and they changed the headline acting like they were being charitable to me. They changed it because my Archdiocese called them and said he's not banned in Denver, and if you don't correct that, we're going to put out a statement. So I've been vetted pretty heavily on this stuff. Now that's not an endorsement. The things that I've talked about, they're happening now, and they come to fruition fairly quickly. What the Archdiocese did was that theologically I'm sound and orthodox, and I've been consistent. I gave them 20 years. Actually, one of my priests who keeps the archives, he had kept all the letters. Smart fellow, too. He didn't just keep, I said, letters. He kept the letters, and he also kept the postmarked envelopes. So when he made the scans, he was able to send them and show them, you know, what it was, and when it was sent on that. They examined over 20 years of material. I've been consistent, I'm theologically sound. They made no comments on the prophetic things because who knows, will either prove itself out or not. Now, the thing is that in these times, very few people try to argue with me about the storm anymore, about the breakdown of our cultural norms, of the economies, of nations, and that simply because it's all around us. And that. I don't know why anybody would argue with me at all, because really about the only thing left to argue about is about being rescued. Let me tell you what I was told. When I was a boy, I figured out, it was early in second grade, I figured out, you got to understand, I come from Southern fundamentalists. Now, if you're down in the American South amongst fundamentalists, people all the time are saying, God told me this, God told me that. So it didn't seem so weird to me. What was weird was that God sure did talk different to me than he was talking to them. But finally, in second grade, I realized, oh, wait a minute, they're talking, euphemistically. Most people who see angels and such that others can't, and hear voices that others can't, they're plumb crazy. And the interesting thing, I told my angel, the reason what really triggered me figuring this out, there was some story about a guy that had shot some people because of what the voices told him. And I started figuring it out from that point. I had gotten together with my angel and I told him, now look, I like this instruction. It's kind of fun. I mean, you tell me something's going to happen, it does. Amaze your friends, amuse your family. What's not to like about that? But the thing is, why didn't you tell me to do harm to somebody? I'm going to go to a doctor, and the jig's up. And beyond that, before I'll ever actually act, there has to be an authority on earth that I can submit to with my whole heart, and it has to allow it. I thought he'd be mad. I mean, put conditions on an angel, but actually he was real pleased. He thought he treated me like I was the smartest kid in class. I was so enthused, I thought he was going to take me out for ice cream. Still a little upset, he never did. But he also put some conditions on me, and we went forward. But what he was always telling me was that in my lifetime, the world would enter into the greatest crisis in the history of the world. That people would think it was the end, but it was not. That it was the beginning of God recalling his people. That souls have been being lost at an unprecedented rate over the last 100 years. And that God wanted all his kids back. And God had specific work for me in that time if I would accept it. But to be able to do it properly, it would require a lifetime of instruction and training. Okay. That seemed like a good plan. I can't say that I believed it for the first half of my life. I thought for a long time, certainly by the time I got in my late teens and throughout most of my 20s, I thought maybe it was just a weird way that my mind processed a very powerful intuition, because I was very good at seeing what was going to happen, seeing the logical consequences of various choices. It got to the point, where the world was looking so much like what I was shown, that I thought, okay, I better get with some priests or somebody here, because this sounds like it may be real. But on the other hand, the key thing was, it all looked so ugly and so confused and so chaotic that I figured, man, if it is true, we're going to need somebody that took the training, that accepted the instruction, because God wants all of his kids back. Now, what I've said consistently, is that all the underpinnings, all the structure is falling apart, that it would manifest itself in a global civil war fought on cultural lines, which is exactly what we are in right now. We've got the traditional faith, and we've got people that want to absolutely destroy traditional faith. The Brexit vote was something that shocked the globalists. They thought and they're shocked. They're enraged right now. A lot of the dislocation, they keep underestimating. The progressives, the anti-God progressives, have thought for so long that they're so obviously right and we're so obviously knuckle under by every time we disagree with them on something, just calling us an ignorant bigot. They don't know what to do. But they won't go quietly into the night. That storm is upon us. It's not going to get better for a while. It's going to get worse. And we're all called to do something very specific during that time. And I'm going to talk to you about that. But what I've also said consistently is that God is sending Our Lady to rescue us, visibly and miraculously, late in 2017. That's what I'm told. Now, when I tell you late in 2017, if that doesn't set off some red flags, it should. Very simply, it should. Frankly, over the decades of the writings that they have seen, I'm right on all the fundamental issues. The one thing that I've missed a lot, I've frequently been wrong on times. I'll be anywhere from 3 months to 5 years off on that. But that's because part of the instruction is you need to learn how to interpret. Most of us, we interpret like a black and white cartoon. I mean, I listen to people that sound like a second grader that's learned long division and wants to enlighten me on nuclear physics. They're idiots. It's not a linear thing. You know, most of the time, our interpretation of prophecy is wrong. I had about 20 years where on small things, I'd be told something, I'd put my mind to it, and it'd be wrong every time. Sometimes in big ways, sometimes in little ways, but it was always wrong, which made me very careful. This is very difficult stuff. The reason I was wrong on time so much was because in heaven, from eternity, basically they only say two things, soon and now. It led me at a few points. I told my angel, so I think soon means something different up there than it does down here. But this one, he was very specific, late in 2017. Now, I know it's 2016 now, so that sounds very convenient. But in the archives that they studied, I mean, my priest and I talked about this. I was kind of interested in looking back, okay, when's the first time I wrote it that I could find in the records? And that would be August 2001. I would have wrote about it in one of the letters, assuming that we had talked about it several times. It was clear from the context that late in 2017. This isn't something I just started saying. It was very emphatic that I tell people this, and that I tell people that time. Last year when I went out on the road, just before I did, I was reading a story in an old National Geographic that I think God intended me to see. The story was about shipwrecks close to shore in a storm. And the thing about it was, in most shipwrecks that are close to a shore in a storm, most people die within easy swimming distance of shore. They die because they can't see shore, and they give up. When they could have gotten there fairly easily with just a little bit more effort. And I think that this is a great condescension by God to his people. It's going to look real ugly. You know how stormy it is now? If you really just objectively go away from how stormy it was last year and how stormy it is now, it's kicked up dramatically. I think it's going to get real stormy. I think God wants me to tell you that so that you know, regardless of how choppy it looks and how stormy it looks, shore is a lot closer than you think. Hang in there. Hang on. So I think that's one of those little graces, and that's why I say it everywhere I go. What we're called to do is acknowledge God, take the next right step, and be a sign of hope. And I'm going to expand a little bit on each of these. But I want to tell you, right now, things are not what they seem. I've been saying for a while that we've been delivering. People think that they're exercising power. People think that they're solidifying their gains. What's happening is that we have delivered ourselves up to judgment. Right now, for each heart, for each person, God is testing. Do you love your neighbor, or do you love your own purposes? Do you love yourself? What are you? Who are you? When we doubled down that Supreme Court ruling on yesterday for Anthony Kennedy thing, he thinks he judged. He delivered himself up to judgment. And unless he repents, I sure as heck wouldn't want to be Anthony Kennedy. That's what's happening all over. God is exposing who we are, exposing to each of us, and exposing to the rest of the world who we are. It's going to get more chaotic. The progressive left, anti-God left, has gotten so emphatic that they must crush Christianity. They must be in charge. They're not going to go gently into the night just because people vote against them. I mean, you look right now in Great Britain, they're still yelling, let's have a do-over. They're stupid bigots. They just don't stop. The European Union. Now this was actually, I mean, if you know that God wins, there's a little bit of hype or a little comedy here. The European Union says, okay, we're going to take your armies, we're going to take your complete control over all your economy, and you better get in line. And this is their plan, to have no more people leave. I mean, what a dumb plan, but they're frantic. They're hysterical. I mean, basically, the anti-God progressives, they've lost the power to argue. Because when you look at facts, when you go through that, you just don't, they don't have an argument. Their only argument is the sneering put down. They don't know what else to do. Or the bullying tactic. I mean, here in America, if you want to stand for marriage and you bake cakes, or you sell flowers, we'll bankrupt you. We'll fine you, we'll bankrupt you, maybe we'll put you in jail if you won't participate. They're not going to go quietly into the dark night, but here's what's going to happen. Very quickly, we're going to have a period of chaos because they're not going to go quietly in the night, but the situation is going to be reversed. You may have heard, those of you who have read regularly, I've been saying for a long time. I first told one of my priests about it in 2008, in early summer. One of my priests, at that time I was on WLS on Sunday nights doing a political show, and I held up my hand, part of my job, and I don't know that. But he was asking me, he said, so have we got a chance with John McCain? At that time, John McCain was leading. And I had told him, I said, Father, now you got to understand, he knew this was in Chicago. He knew that I knew Barack Obama from Illinois politics, and I didn't much care for him, and vice versa. I also knew John McCain from some of his things. I got to tell you honestly, I'm not a big fan of McCain either, but I did my part. And I told him, I said, Father, I said, Barack Obama is going to win the nomination, and he's going to win this race. I said, you got to think about it. For the last 15 years, he's right out of central casting. He's shallow. He's petty. He's glib. And, he's just right out of central casting to lead us into the storm. He will lead the world into the storm. But he ultimately, and I was telling him things that I had been told, he ultimately will convert and will repent, but not until long after he's out of power, and knows that he was the one that was chosen to lead the world into ashes, that he is, his acolytes then were saying that he was God's instrument. I said, he is God's instrument, but not the way he thinks, not the way they think. He's God's instrument in the way that Pharaoh was God's instrument, which is a terrible thing to be. I further told him that Barack Obama would not finish his full term in office. come from the political system, so now we're upon it. And that a lot of people in politics where I used to work had thought that was absurd for a long time. Of course, a lot of people, other people thought it was absurd. I've heard from more people on the East Coast, my old stomping grounds, that have said earlier this year, man, I hope you're right, because we're in real trouble. I had one guy that was kind of an agnostic, and we had cooperated on a few things, and we had fought on a few things and all that, and he had called me a couple of months ago. He said, man, Charlie, I hope you're right, because if you're not, we're doomed. It's over. The American experiment is finished. We are doomed. So we're not doomed. And maybe he's going to become a Christian after all. But what we're called to do is the little things. I worry now when you've been oppressed, when they've ridiculed you, when they've attacked you, when they've gone through all of that, when they've tried to bankrupt you, when they've tried to jail you, when they've threatened you, when they've marginalized you, the temptation is overwhelming to do the same. Now some, with the wimpy idea of Christianity, think that you just let there be no consequences. Neither way is the way that we're called. If you've got somebody, if you've got a drug addict in your family, a lot of people have drug addicts or alcoholics. If you give them money and they waste it on booze, you say, oh, well, that's okay, I'll give you more money all the time. That's not Christianity, that's enabling. We are not to enable. The people who have abused their power, there must be consequences. But it can't be consequences unto death on things. We can't act out of malice. I appeal to you. Study St. Joan of Arc. Study Abraham Lincoln. People who fought with real fortitude and vigor and gave no quarter, but did it entirely without malice. I love St. Joan of Arc. Whenever she was going to a British, when she was going to one of the English strongholds, she'd spend about an hour or longer pleading with them. You know, surrender or retreat, sometimes cheerfully. And they call her the nastiest things, you know, I mean, really ugly, vile things. Some of which you might actually find in Las Vegas. And she'd just keep going. Well, when the time was up, when the hour or two was up of mercy, as it were, she was all hammer and tongs. And they wished that they would have taken her advice to begin with. And act with resolve, but without malice on things. With one of my favorite things with Abraham Lincoln, you know, he never flagged in the fighting of the Civil War. When people were trying to have him come up with some sort of a compromise without standing for the principle, he would not do it. But the war, the deaths weighed heavily on him. After it was over, and he did something that we get squeamish at right now. Unconditional surrender. He insisted upon it. After they did, some of his military commanders were asking him, okay, what about if we come up with Confederate leaders, what do we do with them? I just love this phrase of Lincoln's. He said, well, let them up easy. He said, on the leaders, if some of them escape to Mexico or wherever, so that wouldn't be such a bad thing. That's the whole thing. And he was focused on bringing it back, on making us one people again. I do like Joseph Johnston was the #2 general in the Confederacy, and he is a distant relative. I do love, after the war was over, when they were doing the negotiating terms, you know, where the men were able to keep their swords, keep their horses, he was with Sherman. Sherman was his counterpart. And Sherman told Johnston that Lincoln had been assassinated. I love what happened. Johnston just went pale, and he actually started crying. And he said, Sherman testified to this, that the South has lost the best friend it had. Drawing things together. And this is why do I emphasize this? I emphasize this because people like you are going to be in charge again. The situation is going to reverse much quicker than you think. Do not treat those who have tormented us with the same malice that they've treated us. But also, don't leave them without consequence. I'm writing a series of articles. Some of those who have been doing it, they're probably not going to be happy or think that, boy, this isn't very nice. But frankly, I'll tell you, I've said this several times. For dissent, for disagreeing, there's no consequence to that. This is America. This is about free speech. But for those that have abused their office, for those who have taken their oath to try to punish people who disagree with them, we are going to have political prisons for a while, for the duration of the storm. Those 17 attorney generals that want to make it a felony to disagree with them on climate change, they're going to jail. All those judges that imposed gay marriage on people without getting the people's thing, they just have to leave office. They're not going to jail unless they refuse to leave office. But for all of them, for every judge, for every human rights commissioner that has fined Christians for just trying to live their faith, they're going to jail for the duration of the storm. There has to be consequences. For the Harris County in Houston, the Harris County District Attorney that was charged with investigating Planned Parenthood and chose instead to indict David Delighton on trumped-up charges. You know where she's going? Jail. The IRS commissioner that's sitting there right now, going to jail, as is Lois Lerner. They have to know that when you try to destroy people's lives, misusing your power simply because they disagree with you, you have consequences. You will never again hold an office of trust, and meantime, you are going to be deprived for a time of the freedom that you tried to deprive them of. That is absolutely necessary, and it's part of what it is. Disagree all day long, as long as you don't abuse power to try to punish people for disagreeing with you. These are things that have to be done. People get caught up in the big things. I want to talk about what acknowledge God, take the next right step, and be a sign of hope is. Because we need to concentrate on the little things. By the way, I brought these with me. If you look at the Bible, y'all can come up and take a look at them. They were held. My best friend, they were in his brother's law office in St. Louis, and he gave them to me last time. The priest who keeps the archives has wanted me to get them to him, and I will see him on this trip, so I brought them. These are the original shoes I wore on my pilgrimage. I traversed 3,200 miles, probably walked 2,500 of it. I get rides and all of that. But what happened was, my brother, on the day before I left, gave me these shoes. Said they'd be great. They were so comfortable. And they lasted. By the time I got to 2,000 miles, they were getting a little bit ratty, but I thought, man, they've gone this far, I'm going to make it get the rest of the way with me. And the last 1,200 miles, I was preparing them anywhere up to 3 times a week with my needle and thread. The islands go through, you can see how the bottoms are gone through. But these things, 1 pair of shoes the whole way. So I brought them. You can see what it looks like. I was in Kansas at one point. I get asked, with how far I had gone, I'd get asked, a state trooper had stopped me in Kansas. He asked me how many pairs of shoes have you gone through. I said, original pair. I repair them fairly regularly, but the original pair, hi fella. And he said, no, that can't be true. And I lifted up to show the wear on it, and he said, well, maybe it could be. Anyway, the little things. Prayer, people get caught up a lot of times. Let's talk about acknowledge God and what that really is. People get caught up on formal prayer. Formal prayer is a good thing, but it's not the only form of prayer. We are an evangelical faith. We are called to go forth, what we're supposed to do. I tell people all the time, there are many devotions, many good devotions, just as there are many different types of food. God gave us such variety because he knows that we all have different tastes. Do not pile devotion on top of devotion. Choose some that speak to you and live them well. And then go do your work. The most under-respected form of prayer is the prayer of duty. Now, I'm close to a lot of families that have, young families that have a lot of kids. I just like kids. I was a single dad, and kids, I love a lively child. I always see a lively child and I think, by God, that child's going to grow up to be a good American in the best sense of the word. Prayer of doing. I get mothers that, I can't say enough rosaries, I can't do enough of this because I got to take care of the kids. I said, no. We've got it backwards. When you got kids, when you're changing the diapers, when you're washing the clothes, when you're making a joyful house, that's prayer. That's living prayer well. You're giving an example of what God is supposed to be there. When we get older and we don't have, or we can't live the prayer of doing so well, then we need to adopt more, a few more devotions because we can't do the prayer of doing so well anymore. But we haven't improved our situation. Let me tell you about acknowledge God. What I think encapsulates. And that doesn't mean always, like I said, pray, but it means knowing that God is the source of everything for us. He is our everything. He is the source of our joys. He is the source of what lets us go through things. My kids, well, of course, this is Las Vegas. I've never been here before. Although I do want to know, there has been this deal that everywhere I go, they get unusual storms. I got snowstorms in the Northeast that are unprecedented and all that. When I was in the Southeast, I have never seen such rain in all my life as in Florida when that tropical storm comes in. Holy cow, so I come to Las Vegas and you get rain. They're asking me, California, please get here soon, we need the rain. The thing is, you get to Las Vegas, you get rain. It doesn't change the heat. It's still hot as the dickens. When you get rain here, all it is a steam bath. When I was little, having come from fundamentalist things, my parents went through this period, which, thank God, was brief. But on Sundays, the Lord's Day, we put it, you couldn't have any fun. If they heard our voices loud and all that, we were yelled at. We just had to sit around and mope. This was not a good plan for endearing Jesus to children. It just really wasn't. And like I said, it was mercifully brief. My parents, it was from other folks. My parents were fairly practical folks on that stuff. But I determined that I'm never going to make it feel miserable like that for my kids. July 4th, one year, we're going to Great America. It's a Six Flags Park in Chicago. It was just 10 miles from my house. One of the things that people don't know, I don't know if you got a Six Flags around here or not, do you? Good. Okay, one of the things that people miss, they think that July 4th is a terrible day to go to the Six Flags Park. That it'll be jam-packed. Wrong. Here's some news you can use. Most of the folks from out of town, they're doing something else that day. They're not making a Great America. I call it Great America because that's what we call it in Chicago. It's originally done by Marriott. They're not going to Great America. They got other things to do. Most of the locals, they're staying away because they think it'll be jam-packed. It's actually one of the greatest days to go. You could go on all of them. Well, first of all, we go to Mass. And my kids are like, Dad, we got this day. Why don't we go to church? And I told them, holiday, holy day, and everything. I said, but really, we got a whole day together. I said, so we're going to ask Jesus to make it a really good day, to have us enjoy everything, that's all. Well, okay, that sounds reasonable. We went in. We get to the park. We went on all our favorite roller coasters. We went 4 or 5 times. Okay, there were no serious lines. On the flume rides are great. And I guess in Las Vegas, they got to be great because it's so hot here. We did everything. For myself at the time, He was a huge fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Who do you think showed up surprise at 3 o'clock in concert? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we went to listen to the Turtles. Just great day. After the fireworks, we're walking back out to the car. My son looks at me and says, "Wow, Dad, Jesus really did give us a great day." And my daughter's eyes went wide and she said, "He really did. You were right." Well, we would have gone to Mass anyway after that, but I tell you what, with my kids, when we had a day that we were going to go do something, they always reminded me, "Hey, go to Mass first." That, my friends, is acknowledging God. We only did a little, but the whole day was acknowledging God. That's what it is. The next right step. Let's talk about that for a minute. What is the next right step? How do you know what the next right step is? Well, you don't. That's why I don't tell you to take the next 10 right steps. Because if you get in the wrong thing, you got more to correct there. What is the next right step? Right now, it's kind of amazing. You've got, I swear, our elite institutions, government, media, universities. They're idiots. They remind me of Wile E. Coyote. They are absolutely convinced that they should tell you how to live every aspect of your lives because they're brilliant. And no matter how many times they hit the canyon wall, splat on the floor, or blow things up, it never deters them from the idea that they ought to tell you what you ought to do. That's not the next right step. This preening arrogance that I know better than you what you should do. Now some people, I would assume most people, are wiser than that. Most people that would be here are wiser than that, but they get off on the wrong tangent too, because they see how huge the problems are, how huge the challenges are, and how little each of us are. And they get paralyzed. They think there's nothing I can do that will make a difference. No, that also is not the next right step. I want you to remember who our God is. Our God is the same Christ who, when there were 5,000 that needed to be fed, took the 2 little fish, a couple of loaves, and fed them all. The little boy, as I understand, gave the fish. This is what you need to do. You can't solve all of these problems. Not one of us can. If you got 2 little fish, a hunk of bread, and you got 5,000 people to feed, you can sit all day and come up with plans, redo the plans, all that. Everybody's going to remain hungry. But when you give it to Jesus, He is the God of generosity, the God of abundance. He just works things. Always give it to Jesus. What it means is do the little you can that's right in front of you. Don't worry about what you can't do. Always acknowledging God, and things will be taken care of. Now, I got to tell you, God is a great dramatist. He often doesn't like to let us see things taken care of until the last minute. I think he'd be a producer if he decided to come back again. Give it to Jesus, and everything will be multiplied. That really is what the next right step is. Now, people ask me often, too, how do I know? How do I know that I'm going in the right direction? Well, again, you don't. But you've got to do something. God calls us to stretch out our hand. He wants us to reach out to Him. And I like to give the example. If you're on a lake, if you're on a still lake with a rowboat, you're pointed in that direction, you need to go in that direction. If you're not doing anything, boy, it's sure hard to get that boat turned in the right direction. But if you start rowing just a little bit, the lightest touch of a finger will move it in the proper direction. Trust God. Do your part, knowing how little it is. Do your part. And then we get into being a sign of hope that goes around you. How do you actually be a sign of hope? Things, of course, I think we all know people that they always talk about how they'd like to feed all the hungry in the world. They'd like to save the snail darter or the whales or whatever the cause of the week is, that. And yet they never even notice when their neighbor is hurting. That's not being a sign of hope. That's simply a vanity, dreaming of a statue that will be built to your nobility. Being a sign of hope means seeing the people around you, offering a little help that's needed when you see it's needed, even before anything has been said. I love, during my pilgrimage, I think it was in Greece, I was walking, I was tired, it was a hot day, and I sat down under the shade of a tree by a construction site, just to get a little rest, kick up. Right across the street was a little neighborhood, small, fairly humble houses. I'd been sitting there for about 6 or 7 minutes, and this Mexican man and his maybe 10-year-old daughter, maybe 9, maybe 7, comes walking over. They got a plate full of, a plate of 2 freshly fried burritos, and a little orange soda for me. They saw this old man sitting there on a hot day, just kicking back, looking like he's kind of tired. They were never going to get any attention for that. They just did it. Their hearts reached out. This is what being a sign of hope is. Be aware, help, and then accept help when it's offered to you. That really is what a sign of hope is. I want to tell you a couple of pilgrimage stories. I'm going to take a sip of gold first. I'll tell you a couple of pilgrimage stories. We'll take a little break so that you can go to the washroom. I don't care if you have to go to the washroom or not. I usually do that for an hour. 10 minutes, come back, and then we'll answer some questions. But a couple of pilgrimage stories. It was 18 months, from February 11, 2011 to August 21st, 2012. I actually, during that 18-month period, spent 13 months of it physically walking. I had a couple of officials back home that had been very worried about me being gone for an entire cycle, and they were out of that work. But these people I had such regard for, such a friendship for. I told 3 of them, if you get into real trouble, I'll give you a month. 2 of them took me up on that, and then I spent the holidays between my brothers in San Diego, and then my mom died. I was taken. During the time I was walking, I learned so many things. It was wonderful. I mean, we are more possessive than you think. I had to laugh at myself. It took me about a month and a half to get into a rhythm. It's scary. When every day you start walking and you don't know where you're going to sleep that night, and sometime during late in the day you've got to find cover to go sleep, it's pretty scary stuff. You get covetous. I was in Louisiana once, and I had just found it was near town, and there had been this beautiful, go into the woods, very thick woods, and immediately there was a clearing. I mean, nobody was going to find me. It was cool inside there. I mean, you get there, and I had to laugh at myself when I realized what I was doing. I stayed for a couple of days there. I had nothing. And I wanted to keep this little copse of woods I had. We get very covetous on things. You learn that we are adaptable. We adapt, we're able to change much quicker than what we think. The thing I most dreaded before I went out on the pilgrimage is heat. I just dreaded those 90-degree days and all that, because I don't like hot days. I deal with cool weather much better than that. And God, in His infinite sense of humor, decided that first summer to give me 100 days where it was over 100 degrees. And when you're walking through the South, if it's 100 degrees during the day, there were times when the low temperature at night was 89 to 92. I look when I was in Austin. Austin, I had 7 days over 110 degrees. And I'd look, I'd go to the library and I'd look online. The low temperature was invariably higher than the high temperature in my native Chicago. Every day I thought, man, what am I doing? But even during that, and it was miserable, one day I'm walking into Iowa, Louisiana. Pronounced Iowa, spelled like Iowa. And I'm on the phone with my daughter. On the phone, I'd stop once a day and I'd usually charge it up. You'd stop at some gas station or something, plug in. I'm talking to her and I'm saying, oh, thank heavens, this heat is finally broken. And just as I was saying that, I turn a corner and there's one of those time and temp signs that says 105 degrees. I said, even better, I've adjusted to the heat. The thing is, things that we dread, we adjust to much, much easier, much quicker than what we think. But there is some misery that comes first. Some of the people I met, first night out, I never walked with traffic. I never hitchhiked. I always walked against traffic. But if somebody stopped and offered me a ride, I figured that was God's way of saying, okay, you don't need to talk. First night I was out. I'm walking, and a couple in a pickup truck, or a big, I think it was a Chevy cab and a half pickup truck, stopped and got me a young couple. They had their baby daughter in the back, maybe a year old. And they're telling me their story, that they're living with his mother. They had gotten themselves a trailer. They were saving up to get the electricity turned on. So they did. They were going to move in. Obviously, not if they're saving to get their electricity turned on. Their last name was neither Trump nor Rockefeller. So I told them my story. They were utterly charmed. We were having, what I was planning to do, but this was just my first night and all that. We had a wonderful time, wonderful talk. They dropped me off about 8 or 9 miles up the road near a McDonald's where there was a copse of woods that I could go into. That copse of woods, by the way, something I learned the first night, it got down to 17 degrees that night. I thought my sleeping bag was defective. I didn't know how cold it was. I got up to drink some water, but something was wrong. I mean, my water bottle was solid. It was frozen. I learned after that, if it was cold, put your water bottle in your blanket with you, in the sleeping bag with you. Anyway, they dropped me off, and we had been having a wonderful chat. Well, the young man tries to slip me a $5 bill. And I said, no. I said, get your electricity turned on. What was that mistake? We had just been having a wonderful conversation, and his face fell. I poked his dignity from him. People want to reach out to each other. They don't want to be taken advantage, but they want to reach out. I realized I had insulted him, and for the rest of that journey, if somebody made a spontaneous offer of help, I always accepted it, and I thanked them with real gratitude. And this is something that we need to consider. Now, I was talking with a priest, not one of my directors, once, and he told me, he pushed one of my little buttons. My buttons get pushed out of nowhere, when even I'm not expecting it. And he had told me, he said, Charlie, we all have to help the less fortunate. And I erupted. I said, no, that's not Christian charity. It's close, but that's not what it is. We do not have to help the less fortunate. We all are the less fortunate, weighed down by the burden of original sin, and we are to help each other as loving brothers and sisters. Christian charity is never a condescension of the greater to the lesser. We are to help each other as loving brothers and sisters. That's what we're called to do. And so that means, pay attention. When you see somebody that's hurting that you can't help, always remember that your family is your first obligation. Don't you ever put your family in need because you were busy showing off on how noble you are. But when you see somebody that you can't help, do it. You lay up treasure in heaven for yourself when you do that. Now, for most of Middle America, that's fairly easy. I tell you that in these times, everybody is going to need some help sometime. What's a little bit trickier for a lot of people in middle America, is there's going to be a time that you need some help. And when someone comes up and offers you that help, we go, oh, don't you do it. Don't you rob people of the treasure, other people of the treasure they lay up in heaven. When somebody comes to you and offers some help when you need it, you thank them with real gratitude. Loving brothers and sisters both give and receive with grace, thanks, and dignity. Several things that, in Laurel, Mississippi, I always love this one. I like my coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, okay? But when you're walking and sleeping in the woods, you don't get a lot of coffee. It don't work out that way. One morning going to Laurel, Mississippi, I see this convenience store around 7:30 in the morning. Coffee, yes! Well, as I get closer to it, it's got R's all over. I cover all the windows. It says liquor. Part of it's a liquor store and all that. I hope they had coffee. I go in. Half of it's a liquor store, but they did have a coffee machine. So I had a coffee pot. So I got myself some coffee. I got my heavy pack on and everything. Walked in with no car. I walk up in the line with my coffee, and this woman, about 65 years old, ahead of me, is looking. She's got a quart of beer in her hand. All black neighborhood running in there. She looks at me, and she was not unkind at all. She asked me, she said, "Are you walking?" Well, I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." She said, "Will you make sure you're out of here before sundown? This just isn't a safe part of town for white men to be walking along." And I looked at her, and I said, "I will fear no evil." I often said that, and when I'd say it, I'd be praying that Lord, please make it so that I'm kind of nervous. And she looked at me, her eyes went bright, and she said, "Are you walking for God?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." She asked me, she says, "Let's pray together." So she's got a quart of beer in one hand. And we prayed, and she said one of the sweetest prayers of protection over me that I got the entire journey. Hearts reach out to each other, I'm telling you. When you do real things, they don't have to, I was just an old guy walking. And people fell all over themselves to be kind to me. In Baton Rouge, I slept, I brought my laptop with me because one of the ways that I kept myself going, before I'd gone, I had signed up with the Man Media to write little articles online. How-to articles. I used a phony name. And they paid me $15 a piece. Take about an hour to write to each of them. But they'd send it through PayPal and all that. I'd transfer it over to a debit card, so boom. So I have to do that. Well, in Baton Rouge, I was in the roughest section of town. There was a library. I made friends with the librarian there. One of the things that you may not know, you can be in a city. I don't know why this is, but I found it to be pretty consistent across the country. In most cities, now you're in Las Vegas, it's different. But in most cities, there's woods. There's plenty of patches of woods all throughout the city. And you can be surrounded by the biggest, baddest, meanest gangbangers in the world. For whatever reason, they're terrified of the woods at night. You can find yourself in cops of woods when it gets to dusk. Jump in, you're good to go. Well, that's where I was. I got down at the light. Yes, go ahead. Time plug. I know what time it is. I'll shut up when I feel like it. Okay? I appreciate it, though, keeping me advised. What I did was I'm walking along. I'm going back. Back to my cops in the woods. I'm tired. In the roughest section of Baton Rouge, this little red Saturn pulls up next to me. In front, there's a man driving, about 30 years old, and a woman on the passenger side, both black and both with gang tats. I'm sure around here you know what gang tats look like and all that. The woman hands out a plastic bag like you get at a convenience store, so I start to talk to her. Before I could say anything, they pull away. I look at the plastic bag. They got soda, juice boxes, snacks, little bags of chips, and cakes, and all that sort of stuff. And I thought about that. Here, roughest section of town, these two gangbangers see this old white man walking, looking like he's rolled down on his luck, maybe a lot down on his luck. And what do? Their hearts reach out. They wanted to do something. Of course, they had a reputation to keep, so they didn't want anybody to know that they were being nice. But I'm telling you, it was consistent all across the country. I'm going to tell you two more stories, and then we'll take our break. Ventura, California. I'm about getting ready to go up into Los Padres National Forest mountain range there, and then I found this wonderful couple right across the street from the Wendy's, and that where I could, I want my soda pop, and that get my soda pop and all that before moving on. But they had all these palm trees very densely set across the road from that, but it had like a clearing inside. So I thought, man, score, I've got this beautiful thing. Nobody will ever find me, but this is real comfy. I laid out my sleeping bag and all that, made camp, as it were, and sit down and read. I'd always make camp a couple hours before the sun went down. And then I'd read for a while. Well, just as I made camp and I'm getting settled and feeling like I'm good, this old man, a little older than me, comes in. He's carrying this plastic sack, bigger than he, clear plastic sack, full of cans and all that. And I realized, okay, he was homeless and I had taken his spot. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, I didn't know that this was somebody's spot. I started to, he says, you're here already. He said, actually, I've got another spot. And you stay here tonight, I'll come back tomorrow night, and all that. And there was kind of a depression back there. He said, I'm going to leave these cans here, though, tonight if you'll kind of keep an eye on them. I said, sure. We talked for a little bit. And he looks at me before he gets ready to go. He said, you know what? Tell you what, if you're short of cash, he said, the recycling center's right over there. You feel free to take those cans over. This bag was like this high. He had to have been working all day, and maybe it was a product of a couple of days. Once again, his heart reached out. I found it consistent all throughout the country. And finally, I'm going to tell you one story. It's not a very good story, but it's a story I love. So you're getting it anyway. My sister was the assistant manager at a co-op, farmers co-op, at a big commercial tomato farmers county. Well, one day I'm in town for a week, and I was going to visit. I figured I'd stop by the co-op. They were covered up with business. They had 4 registers going. She had come out to run one of the registers. 3 deep was at each of the registers. I'm here, they'll pass. The man that was second in line at the register she was working, he was just a jerk. Old farmer, I'm one of your biggest customers. You need to take. I mean, he was just being obnoxious. And finally, Kim looked at him and said, look, I'll take you when it's your turn, and if you don't shut up, you're going to the back of the line. As soon as she said it, he arms crossed. I've been praying for more patience. He hit one of my buttons. I looked at him before I knew it. I was saying, don't you know when you pray for patience, God doesn't sprinkle you with magic fairy dust to make you patient. He gives you opportunities to be patient. So quit complaining and thank God for answering your prayer. He looked at me, his eyes were wide, and he said, you're right. I should have known that. I'm a preacher. In any case, I'll finish this way. Satan is always trying to isolate us. He's trying to call us from the herd. If he can get us off alone, he can do things with us. He tries to lead us into despair. Now, everybody here, unless maybe there's a really holy 12-year-old here in the crowd, everybody here has done something you never thought you'd do. Something that you just didn't expect. And that you're ashamed of. Everybody. On that. Sometimes, actually, this is more dangerous for the noble souls because they get proud of how noble they are. And when they do something that they're ashamed of, they go into despair. And they maybe don't go to Mass because they're too ashamed to be seen. They're not worthy. They don't do the things that they should because they're in such deep despair. Boy, the devil has fun with that. I want to tell you that God is not the least bit interested in whether you are worthy. He already knows with you that you're not. We're just little creatures. And he wants all his kids back. What God is interested in is, are you willing? Are you willing to do the little right in front of you? In good times and in bad. When you stumble and do something you really should do, if you get back up the next day and try again, humbly knowing that we'll stumble and bumble in the race. And if you're willing, then God will make of you a useful instrument in his hands. We're going to take that break, take some questions. I'd like to finish with the St. Michael prayer. I really love the St. Michael prayer. One thing to tell you about the St. Michael prayer, I've been in every region of the country. This is like my 62nd, 65th presentation. And everybody says it kind of different. It wasn't written in English, you say it in translation. You say it the way you've been taught, I'll say it the way I've been taught, and let's say it together, by God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Michael, the Archangel, defend us in that battle. We are safeguarded against the wickedness and snares of the devil.
May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. Do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, all the evil spirits, prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls.
Amen. God bless. We'll take 10. We'll come back.